Aim high, shoot far, aim for the moon. If you miss, you'll hit a star. Hello, good day, salutations. Welcome to Better Together, the home where we Lupus warriors tell our stories and spread some love, share some love with each other. My name is Chanel Gabriel. I'm your host for this evening, and I recommend you take some time. You're going to take some deep breaths because this is a heavy topic today, and I think we all kind of know how it feels, the subject that we're going to be talking about. It's going to be on your heart, and we're going to go deep into what it means to be a lupus warrior, what it's like to fight these battles we fight. And we're family. We're a family in here. Everybody that's been on this show, that is on this show, is a part of this family. And when one raises their hand for help, we all rise to the occasion. It's really important. So stay tuned for us sharing love to one another. The subject of today, we're thinking about rock bottom, and what that looks like is rock bottom can look differently in different scenarios in our lives. It shows its face in intimate relationships, in tough days at work when people are getting on your nerves, and sometimes your body is reacting to all of that. And for us, it sometimes can affect our health. We know that stress and all of those things, and the things that managing a chronic illness do, can also affect our health. So our first patient advocate that we're going to bring in is going to be April Glass, and she's going to be talking about her extensive family and her experience with lupus. And we had her family here a week ago, and so she's joining us today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what those hardcore struggles she's faced has been, and creating a medical team. We're going to work together to help her get a medical team and talk about what we all need to know about how to recognize our needs as Black women with lupus. All right. To all of my family that's joining us, my sisters dealing with lupus, if you are here, please use the chat. Please engage with each other. Let me get a witness in that chat. Say yes, if you are there. Most of us have been there. Okay, tell us your struggles in the chat, and we will just share. Okay. Now it is my pleasure to bring in to this story our medical host, my co-host, Dr. Michaela, and she has taken extra time to reach out to our first guest, April, so we can understand how important it is that we choose a medical team that listens to us and believes when we're telling them something's going on. So welcome to the stage, bringing my co-host, Dr. Michaela Bayard.
Hey, Chanel. Thank you for the warm welcome. And as always with you, I am so looking forward to connecting with all our viewers, hearing from our guests tonight. And as Chanel said, it is so true. April and I had some time to really dig into her story. She shared a lot with me about her personal lupus journey. And she was just so honest about how this has been a tough time for her, and that she's been experiencing some ups and downs and some roadblocks recently. And, we talked a lot, as a rheumatologist, I'm always talking about what people's symptoms are and what constitutes a flare for them, whether it's joint pain or rash or fatigue, as we mentioned earlier today. It's just so, so tough to manage all of it. But what we really want to dive into today is to really talk about, well, what happens when you have that bad flare? What's your plan in place? Who are your people who are going to take care of you? And we really want people to walk away tonight thinking about who that team is. So I want to bring April in, and let's hear from her.
Hi.
Hi, April. We're so happy you're joining us here tonight.
Thank you.
I guess it's not nighttime because you're joining us from Cali, right?
Yeah, it's still daytime.
So we chatted a lot, and we understand, you've been going through some frustrations with your symptoms and managing all of the different physicians who are helping take care of you. What are you doing now to start to manage some of your stress and just the stress of dealing with all this?
Well, I do work out practically every day of the week. Sometimes I take one day out to kind of relax. But that's kind of like my mental state. You're kind of out of sight, out of mind, So it's like I have to keep something to keep my mind together. Um, it's been rough for me that I share with you.
Thank you, April, for being so open, because I know it's been tough, but I'm actually really impressed that you are getting to the gym every other day.
I know.
No, actually, I have a gym membership, but I bought myself a Nora track treadmill. I run and I do my treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
And I lift weights too.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Uh,
I was gonna
yeah.
actually take a moment. April, your mic is just a little distorted, so we're gonna bring in somebody while we get your
All right.
mic taken care of. But we have Dr. Sean coming in, and Dr. Michaela. I feel like fellow doctor should be introducing my doctor.
Well, we do have another special guest tonight. It's Dr. Teo Strawn, and he is a psychiatrist by practice. But he also owns and works in his own health and wellness center. But I'm going to let him talk a little bit about it, and maybe he can kind of give us some insight on how that would play into this medical team that we're talking about tonight.
So welcome, Dr. Strawn. How are you?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me this opportunity, Dr. Bayard and Chanel. I almost felt like in preparation for this conversation, every patient I saw today had a chronic medical issue that just required me to go a little bit deeper than I normally do. So I know we're talking about lupus today, but a lot of what I see and deal with is lupus, multiple sclerosis, sometimes patients who have cancer at different stages, and really how to connect. We've used this word multiple times, team, and as a team player and as a doctor, I always say there's 3 R's to clinical care. As a doctor, you have the right, and a lot of times we want results. But the third R we tend to miss. We tend to jump over it a lot, which is relationships. So you have the right, as a clinical provider, I have the right, I have the training to tell you what to do. Unfortunately, sometimes with the right, doctors like to be right. And sometimes we need to listen a little bit more. But we have the right, and a lot of times it's because we're so focused on the outcome. But the relationship is everything. Relationship building is everything, not just as a provider, but also as an advocate for the patients that we serve. And in terms of just relationship, it's how do you learn to listen? So a big part of my job is listening. A lot of times when we think of psychiatrists, we've gotten this misconception that psychiatrists just give meds. That's what we do. But psychiatrists actually do talk too, and we do therapy. And I happen to be a psychiatrist who likes to talk, but actually like to listen even more. Because when patients come in who are dealing with a lot of chronic issue, they want to be heard, they want to be seen, they want to be understood, they want to be validated. There's so much that's going on. And one of the biggest things I think sometimes that's going on when you're experiencing a chronic medical issue is grief. And grief is complex. It's like carrying a suitcase of very, very painful emotions. Sometimes you're carrying it alone, you know, especially if you're the person who's used to taking care of everyone. And now you're in this position where so much of your life has changed. You're losing not just the tangible things, your job, your health, but you're also losing a lot of the intangibles, your belief of yourself. Where do I go next? So it's extremely overwhelming. And, patients come to me for answers, but a lot of times it's how do I remove myself from just having that right and reflex to tell you what to do and just slow down and listen.
That is so important. I do a lot of speaking around living with lupus, and the speech I usually give is talking about I speak about the stages of grief and mourning and thinking about how it relates to people living with lupus. So I think that's such a really great point that we don't always think about. Like doctors say, we have a chronic illness. We know that people are living with it longer, right? Although it can be very life altering and life changing and threatening. But what does it mean to like lose the ability to just kind of take up and go, whenever you would like to, what does it mean to have those things that are limitations now when you previously, I can't say I have not yet met a person with lupus who's not type A, who's not doing 8 billion things and a caretaker for their community or family. I don't know anyone else. Like I was sitting on the couch every single day and then all of a sudden had lupus. I haven't met them. Maybe there's somebody out there. I just haven't. But what does it mean to all of a sudden have to depend on people? That's really, really hard.
It's extremely hard. And it's almost learning how to relearn everything that you've learned about yourself, how to develop a new identity, and an identity that you don't really want to accept. So most of the patients that I'm dealing with who have chronic issues, there's a high level of self-awareness. They've always had a high level of self-awareness. And especially because they're, like we say, where a lot of times they're looking out for other people. But self-awareness is a start. It's how do you get to the point of self-acceptance, the acceptance that something has changed. It's like a four-legged stool. You've lost one of the legs and you want to sit on it just the way you sat on it before. But the reality is something's different. And how do you adjust to it? And in that adjustment period, it creates a lot of stress. So if we look at a lot of autoimmune issues, a lot of diseases that we experience, a lot of it is due to a lot of stress that sometimes even preceded the illness. And now you have the illness, and then now you have to deal with even more stress. And when you think of stress, we all have stress, but once we start coming to that realization that maybe I'm not equipped to really deal with this, or I'm not really sure what's going on, you become overwhelmed. And that overwhelmed feeling then lead to a burnout.
And Dr. Sean, that's where I see patients. So I'm seeing people when they're flaring, when they're having the most symptoms that, Chanel can attest to. That's when maybe you start to think, okay, what's my next step? And you reach out to the physician or rheumatologist you feel most connected to. But can you talk a little bit about what your role may be in that setting?
So sometimes my role is as a consultant, but there have been many times where in my role, even though as a psychiatrist, being a medical doctor, sometimes we're the first person to even order the tests or maybe suggest that maybe you see your primary care provider to address these things. So when I receive these patients who already have chronic medical issues or mental health issues, a big part of what I'm doing is really slowing it down and connecting. So a lot of times I'm almost like a liaison between just what's happening mentally and physically. When we think about medical care, we see people as, we compartmentalize. Here's the rheumatologist, the cardiologist, the person who deals with the brain. So a big part of it is how do you slow it down and realize that here's a disease, but we cannot forget the individual who has the disease. And being able to communicate that to providers is very important in terms of what I do. In terms of addressing the mental part of it, which, most patients who struggle with lupus, there's always going to be some neuropsychiatric component to it, headaches, foggy, dizziness, just cognitive changes, a lot of fatigue. It's how do you maybe utilize maybe some medications to help with that, in addition to a lot of other modalities, therapy, really connecting them to different providers and just connecting the dots. I mentioned grief, I mentioned loss, but once you're experiencing a lot of that, what you're feeling emotionally a lot of times is disconnection. So how do you connect? How do you bring that together? A big part of what I do as well is creating individualized treatment plans. And yes, I'm a psychiatrist, but I like to brand myself more as a holistic psychiatrist, because I think there's a definitely connection between what we do mentally, physically, and spiritually. So you're coming into me mentally, but I'm also connecting the dots in terms of what's going on physically and also what's going on spiritually or socially in terms of how do I connect you to a larger support system, not just a medical support system, but a support system that is supportive of what you need. A lot of times when we talk about support system, we have people, but they're not listening to what we need. Sometimes we don't know what we need, but then even when we communicate what we need, they're not hearing it. And it's a powerless feeling.
Sorry, Zoom, one of those things. I was going to say, I've definitely seen that happen where, for me, speaking from living with lupus, it's always been a struggle trying to explain it to my friends and thinking that they're supporting by just being there, when really and truly I'm like, I need more than that. And I don't and I'm expecting them to kind of serve me in this very specific way, and they don't have the tools to do it. April, when she was on, we spoke earlier. Unfortunately, she's not present, but just to speak to a little bit of her story, she talked about something that I definitely have dealt with, where I'm dealing with so much issues with my other doctors, with my like the stress of dealing with insurance companies not wanting to pay and having to argue with them to get medication that I need, and thinking about all of those stressors, thinking I'm fine and then finding out something else is wrong. Those are all a lot of the things that April was going to speak to. But with all of those things happening, what is it that lets me know that I need to see a psychiatrist? Like, what is it specifically? Because I'm dealing with it, I'm juggling it all, and I'm kind of figuring it out. But what is the step when it's like, Chanel, you should probably check in?
That is a really good question. And, sometimes the issue is we just don't know. Sometimes you just don't know, because the way we deal with stress is different. Some people fight, some people flight, some people freeze. And like you said, if you're a type A person, you will fight. So the awareness of when you need help is not always something that's natural. Sometimes it comes from the people around you who are also realizing that you're not functioning. You're not sleeping the same way, or maybe you're sleeping too much. Your dietary habits have changed. You're eating too much. You're eating too little. You're not focusing. You're not concentrating. You're not just a certain. You're losing who you are, the essence of who you are. So on one hand, it would be nice for us to be able to have the awareness to say, hey, now I know it's the time to see a psychiatrist. But a lot of times it's the people around you who might be able to say, hey, April, hey, Chanel, I'm a little concerned about you. At that point, who do you see? Sometimes we see a psychiatrist, sometimes we see a therapist. In my practice, because I have psychiatrists, I have therapists as well, I usually try to see the patients first and get a really big global view of what's going on. Not that a therapist cannot do that, but having the medical background, I'm able to connect with Dr. Bayard, connect with the primary care provider, and get an understanding of what's going on medically, but also kind of understanding the intersection mentally. Come up with a plan, which usually includes seeing a therapist. So it's either going to be myself or it's going to be a team of therapists that I work with, either in my practice or if it's somebody who I think has a better ability to connect with the person. Because like I said, it's not about me, it's about them. So how do you connect those dots? Some other things that you definitely want to pay attention to when you see someone, especially when you see a therapist, is you're not there for them. You're there for you. So seeing a psychiatrist or seeing a therapist doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get what you need out of it. A lot of times we don't even know what we need out of it, but it is a beautiful and amazing opportunity to really show who you are, be vulnerable, be courageous. And in so many ways, those are the things that decreases your stress. Because like I said, our natural stress response is fight, flight, freeze. When you're able to discuss some of these issues in therapy in a very supportive, non-judgmental way, you're able to face some of these challenges, which is what we really need to do when we're dealing with one of those survival type situation. How do we face it? Because by facing it, we're able to see where our opportunities are. We're able to, one of my favorite prayers, I know we talk about recovery, is the serenity prayer. God grant us the serenity to accept what?
Things I cannot change.
Cannot change.
Courage to do what?
Oh, wait, you're really schooling us right now. He's like, this is turned into church. Hold on. I didn't take the test. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
The wisdom to know the difference. So in so many ways, you're coming into therapy because with all the stress, there's a disruption. There's a lack of peace. So you're asking for the serenity to accept the things you cannot change.
But Dr. Shah, I have to stop you. So, we're thinking about these ideal times to have you on our team. But I think something that I see all the time is that patients don't already have you in their pocket. They don't have your number to call. They're not connected to you. And as I've been talking about a lot with April, she's at a point now where it's hard to find you. It's hard to, set up an appointment with you. So I wonder how, we can talk about pulling you in when things are better, when things are more stable, so that you become part of that team when you're in that fight or flight mode.
Right. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. The way in my capacity, I have my private practice where, patients come in. The way they find me could be through their insurance, it can be through referrals, it can be through online websites like Psychology Today. But I also have another part of my practice where I work as a consultant, where I provide second opinions, and it might not be the exact doctor-patient relationship, but being able to give providers some insight into maybe some of the things that they can do. A lot of times psychiatrists are overbooked, overscheduled, maybe there's not enough. So the truth is there's a problem, but if, like Dr. Bayard said, you might not have access to the solution. So how do we connect with folks who are actually doing a lot of those things? Yes, I'm a psychiatrist, but a lot of rheumatologists, a lot of primary care providers, OBGYN, they are psychiatrists too, in the way that they build relationships with their patients, and they're therapeutic. So how do you continue to support the people who are actually already doing the work?
Right. And I think it's such an important point what you said earlier about finding someone who listens to you. And I think it's really strong coming from someone who is a therapist and is a psychiatrist, that a big part of the relationship you can get from your provider is finding someone who's going to hear you and listen to you, so that when you get to that space where you're in fight or flight, you have someone there who's already listening. And I hope that people take that away from today, that we are really encouraging you to find a team like Dr. Sean and I, who are working together already with you before you hit what we're calling today rock bottom or a flare.
Right.
And I think that's really important. Like, I can think of times where, I can speak to my own experience where, you mentioned something, Dr. Strawn, and it connects what you're saying. A lot of times we don't think about what we need until we need it or after we need it. And I think that hopefully, and listening to everything, what do we need in this team? We need our regular doctor. We need, the mental health component. We need the emotional health component. Last week, we talked about some of the physical, thinking about exercise. If you haven't watched it, make sure you go back to previous episodes out there. But thinking about that, like, that sounds like a really good team, and I know a lot of times for me, when it's been really hard, I'm not thinking about, man, I should call a therapist. I'm literally just like, I'm in a corner in a ball under this blanket. And so building those things when we are feeling good seems like the resounding yes from everybody here so far. But that wisdom, it's that wisdom part, to know the difference, the understanding and the courage to, to try to change the things we are. What do you, I'm just curious, what do you think it takes for somebody to step out of that space that they're in, that they're dealing with, whatever? What does it take? What should they have on hand to help them in those moments? What do you think is helpful? And this could be both you as well as just external resources or things like that.
So definitely the team. You definitely want to have a good support system, because you can't see everything. Have really encouraged therapy. I'm a big advocate of therapy. I think it's a great opportunity to see sides of you that you cannot see, but you want to make sure that's what you're receiving. Therapy is not friendship. It's a relationship, but it's a relationship that's very one-sided, and it's supposed to be about you. So really respecting that space and allowing that therapist to really allow you to be, and really allow you to not just have someone to listen to, but also learn how to listen to yourself. A lot of times, when the way we're listening to ourselves is from a place of judgment, and that's also creating more stress. So the way we think, how we eat, how we move has a big impact in terms of how we deal with, some of these chronic issues. I know we talked about exercise, but the way we think as well is an important part of how we heal through some of these challenges.
I definitely can agree with that. I have a therapist as well, and it took a while for me to be honest to him because I would be like, "Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Mhm.
Actually, I'm not," and then I'd be like, "Flood," would open up, And you said it. This idea of judging yourself, like wanting to appear to others as if we have it all together. That's a part of that struggle of like not letting people know that we're not doing well, and also how the narratives that we play for ourselves. Like I can't be a dancer anymore. So who's going to want to be around me? Or I have this chronic illness, going back to like the conversations we've had in the past on relationships. Who's going to want to date me? Like those kind of, that kind of language definitely doesn't help. And it definitely just kind of becomes a spiral. Like it's easy to just get lost and trapped in that, and one final question for me at least right now, how do we know when to call 911? When it goes from just being, I'm just not feeling good to when it's like, no, this is something that really needs some help.
Right. So when you think of mental health, a lot of, like you mentioned, it's how you feel, but it's also how you do. So there's some people who feel really, really terrible, but they're able to function. And there's some people who have the opposite, where they don't feel that they feel great, but they can't function. If that was true, if that's true, because if you think of somebody who's struggling with an addiction, they might feel really good using their substance, but they're not functioning really well. So it's how do you find that synergy between feeling and doing? There's some people when they're not doing well and they need 911, they're going to communicate it based on this is how I feel. You're going to see them crying, you see tearfulness, words of hopelessness. And there's some people you just, they might not say anything. And you sometimes see this in men where you might not hear what they're feeling, but you can tell that they're not doing well by their behaviors. They might not be showering, not going out. So they're doing less of certain behaviors, or they might be externalizing and doing more of other behaviors like drinking more, going out more, seeming more social, becoming promiscuous, and behaviors where you're like, oh, this person's doing really great. But they're also on the verge of maybe hurting themselves or not wanting to be there anymore. When I see patients, a lot of patients never use the word, I want to commit suicide. But there's some other buzzwords you might start hearing, like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. I am hopeless. Hopeless is probably one of the biggest buzzwords to me, because once you get to that point where you're hopeless, what's the purpose of living anymore? Sometimes the pain of your disease or the pain of just seeing what you're not able to do is what drives a lot of thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore. The brain almost distorts itself to make you fantasize that maybe a suicide is just an amazing way to relieve and to release all this pain. So I take suicide extremely seriously, but sometimes you don't hear those words. And I'm saying that because the people closest to you might never say that, because if they say that, the assumption is you're going to overreact. So you pay attention to the subtle things. What are they doing more of? What are they doing less of? Is this characteristic of this person who you know? And once they start saying those things, you listen and you explore, you reflect. A lot of times, if you overcorrect, they was like, okay, I can't say that to Chanel anymore because she's going to do.
Mm.
So how do you listen with compassion, listen in a way where you're letting that person know that, hey, I hear you, I love you, I want you to be here. Here are the steps that we will take so that I can have you a lot longer. Right. So
Mm.
we don't want to overreact. We don't want to underreact. We want to continue to realize that so much of suicide has to do with disconnection. When you're
Mm.
experiencing a loss, you're disconnected. A lot of times that's even where some addiction comes in, because it allows you to feel some connection to something that then makes you disconnect even more. So
Mm.
connection is key when we're dealing with just really assessing, is this person connecting or they're disconnected? How are they feeling versus what are they doing? Is it consistent?
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. And thinking for us as people living with a chronic illness, to us out there, really taking a moment when you are sad, taking a notice. I don't feel like going places. Why is that? Maybe asking those questions of ourselves, that self-awareness might be really, really helpful for us to have, to even be able to recognize what you said, am I just going through the motions because I'm supposed to, but there's really something deeper under there?
Mhm.
I think that that's really, really, really helpful for us to also think about when it comes to depression, because yeah, depression looks different for everyone.
Yeah. And then when you add in culture, the way people grieve, the way people communicate their stories are different. So a lot of times we're looking for this one size fit all, but this is why individualized treatment plans are so important, because we're dealing with a human who has multiple parts, but we're still dealing with an individual.
Yeah.
And how do you really connect with that person and hear their story? Because you can hear hundreds of different stories about a lupus and any chronic medical issues, and there's certain things that are similar, but it's your story.
Yep.
Your story is your story. And how do you allow that person to tell their story uninterruptedly with love and compassion? Sometimes that's the last thought. I mean, sometimes I'm powerless in terms of what I can do. And sometimes I walk away from an interaction with a patient and they say, thank you. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know what I did, but it's what they receive. Sometimes the little you give is a lot to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you should never underestimate your impact when you are really engaging people in a loving way.
Thank you. No, thank you. And listen, I'm gonna just say it like this, Dr. Strawn. Everyone, if your therapist ain't talking like Dr. Strawn, I don't know out there, but no, definitely, everyone loves in a different way, and every counselor, therapist operates in a different way. But thank you so much for sharing that, and we're gonna actually bring in our next guest after all of that powerful and informative information. But our next guest is literally no stranger to Better Together. She is a part of the family. She was on it on the first episode. She is the lemonade maker, and her stories of courage have always helped others move forward. And we're hoping that we hear a little something here about turning lemons into lemonade from Monique Gore-Massey. Welcome to the virtual Better Together stage.
Hello, all. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Chanel. Of course, you are my heart. Thank you, Dr. Michaela. I have to remember to enunciate that,
You
right?
got it.
And Dr. Strawn, I'm over here like rooting. I don't know if I should pass the offering plate around. Like, I don't even know what I should be doing right now.
Church.
You're speaking such great gems. I was like, there's really not much else left for me to say. He is saying it.
I mean, can you just share, like, what were some times that you might have really struggled, like that really were really
Yeah.
challenging, and how did you get through it? What were the supports or the things that helped you get through it?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that because lupus can really have a profound effect on what someone's mood is, what their outlook is. Lupus or any other chronic illnesses, as Dr. Strawn was saying. And I know many individuals, you know me, I'm a global lupus advocate. I'm award winning, I blog.
Let them know.
I do a lot of work in the industry. I do media work. I've been interviewed by from Robin Roberts to you name it. I travel all over the globe and I do a lot of work with rheumatic organizations internationally. But the one thing I always have to say, and you know this, Chanel, I did not just survive, right? So, like, I think one thing that I'm very conscious of reminding people of is what you see now. I am a very living work in progress. And getting to this place, it has been, I've been diagnosed now 12 and a half years with lupus nephritis, fibromyalgia, a few other itises, and a few other comorbidities. It's still an ongoing process. And so one of the one of the down rock bottom parts that I can actually speak to that help project me to get me to here to where I am. It was definitely about 5 years ago when I was told that I have 3 to 6 months left to live. And I know everyone's journey dealing with a chronic illness can be different. For me, when I was finally diagnosed after 2 years of diagnosis, that took a toll on my mental health because I was not believed, right? I was not
Mhm.
validated when I went to the emergency rooms and when I went to these different specialists. So I went 2.5 years undiagnosed. diagnosed about 2.5 months before my wedding. And then after being diagnosed and now married, my health completely deteriorates. And so those first few years, I lost sight, lost the ability to walk, eventually lost the ability to talk, kidney failure, cardiac failure, you name it, all of my organs were failing and attacking one another. And so when they had said to me, you pretty much need to start preparing to transition. And I remember being in that room, my husband was in the room, my mom and my dad were in the room. And I remember seeing the fear on their face and just sitting there feeling like a vegetable within myself. When all of this was happening, it's really hard to understand that I could be a lemonade maker now. But at that point in my life, I was feeling very dejected. I had felt like I had no purpose. Um, I wanted to sleep all the time. I felt very fatigued. And I know when we were speaking to April, and April, if you can hear somewhere out there, I want you to know that some of us have been in those places, and I'm one of those people. Um, feeling like I wanted to sleep all the time. I took myself off of my meds sometimes. I stopped going to the doctors. Um, and then I felt demoralized. I felt like I did not fit into everything that I used to do, the body that I used to have. I was a track star. I played softball. I, I, I was a catcher, made it to the Olympic trials. I used to write all the time. I used to dance. So it's like my body was failing me. And now you're sitting here telling me that I have months to live. So mentally, I had already started to shut down. Mentally, when I woke up every single day, I was angry and I like cursed the air. And God, why would you allow me to live in this space? Why would you allow me to even get married? Why would you allow me to be feeling such financial despair, sexual despair, mental despair, and feeling like I couldn't contribute anywhere? I felt like I literally had no purpose. And so that eventual erosion and then feeling like I was just now everything is being magnified. That was my rock bottom. And so the displacement that I had, the brokenness that I had, and then also I know you guys were speaking about from a spiritual aspect, feeling like I had always been a very spiritual person and my family was and everyone was praying. And now I felt like David, like completely abandoned. Where are you? Where is my God when I need my God? This is not the God that I know. Um, and so I was at that point. I have been at rock bottom. I was there for not just a few weeks, I was there for a few years. And to tell me that I would see myself here, I couldn't necessarily see that at the time.
If I could ask you, Monique, could you just speak on what shifted with your medical team? Because I hope that played a part in things shifting.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that because it was a combination of things. I remember after I was discharged and started to prepare to transition, this was the reality of the situation. And I remember writing because I used to journal. If I couldn't physically write, I would audio. And I remember going back through a few years of what had been going on, and I just felt like there has to be more. Like, did I exhaust all of my opportunity, all of my opportunities, all of my options? Like, what doctor have I not spoken to? Who's not part of my care team? And you know who wasn't a part of my care team? A therapist. Like,
Wow.
no one had said to me, at several points, they put me on psychiatric medication because I was dealing with severe medical depression and onset depression. But I also have to say this. A lot of times, the weathering that we've gone through as my life, one, I'm a woman, I'm a woman of color, woman of Caribbean descent. So the weathering, the burdening, feeling invalidated, carrying like the cross of so many different generational issues, the barriers, unconscious and conscious, and all the disparities, that also preceded my lupus diagnosis. So dealing with depression at the time, it wasn't just lupus. There were a lot of other things, and I hope individuals know that you're not alone in that, because we don't just show up with just lupus. We're traumatized by so many other things that we might have faced in our life, and so no one had ever asked me, is there someone that you have to specifically speak to about this? So yes, partnering with a therapist, someone who's asked me how is my overall health, as Dr. Sean said, my holistic health, from my spiritual to my movement to my breathing, and really then beginning to tap into that, realizing that those key pieces were not a part of my standard of care.
No,
Thank you,
thank you.
Susan.
I mean, I think that that's so powerful. And I always appreciate you telling that part of your story because, once again, we'd be looking amazing living with this illness. We look like we have it all together, and no one would know the battles that people are fighting alone unless we share them. And I think that you finding a space, finding a therapist to be able to help share some of that story and share some of those things that are there was really important. Just passing over to Dr. Strawn to just, anything stand out to you in this story, and when you've seen different people with chronic illnesses, or just in general battling the trauma, of life, what are some of the techniques or things that maybe they should think about with, I know there's behavioral therapy. I don't know. I don't even know what those things are, all of the names, but just wondering what in your practice kind of helps support people like us who are dealing with all of these things.
Mhm.
So Monique, you touched on so many things, and this is one of the reasons why talk therapy or just talking is so important, because once you're able to get to that point of acceptance, which we often get at rock bottom, you see the opportunities, you see the beauty to who you've always been. One of the things you also mentioned is that before the diagnosis, there was a lot of trauma. There probably was a lot of shame. There was some cultural issues. There was just so many different things that came into the equation that was never really processed. And as a result, sometimes how we think actually changes our physical health. And we can eat right, we can exercise, we can do a lot of the right things, but if we don't allow ourselves to think about how we're thinking or be able to process that, it almost like cancels itself. So talk therapy is one, but if there's issues with trauma, there's so many different trauma informed strategies. One that I really like is EMDR, which if you find a really good EMDR therapist, can help you really process some past traumas. I'm also a big fan of somatic therapies. Sometimes it's not just about talking, it's also about feeling. Touch is important. Massage therapies, even things like skin brushing, I believe in terms of being able to just feel, because when your body is trying to communicate with you, and you need to communicate with your body as well. And so the therapy, the somatic therapies, massage therapies, just really learning techniques to be compassionate to yourself. Sometimes that loss, like you said, is you're suffering in silence. You see a beautiful black woman, and everyone's like, maybe I don't really understand this lupus. Versus if they see another illness that they can understand, they're like, oh wow, she got a bruise here. But a physical bruise and a mental bruise, what they have in common is pain. And sometimes that mental bruise is so painful, and it's even more painful because no one can see it. They're just focusing on what they see when they look at you. So having that space, like you said, to talk about that was healing, because you were able to not just accept it, but you was able to receive a lot of the things that is part of the healing process, which is compassion, which is love, which is nurture, which is a lot of those unmet needs that sometimes go unheard. So I
And
really
that's
appreciate your
part of
journey.
me.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's part of me being a lemonade maker, right? How do I want to identify myself now? Because we understand that these diseases, quote unquote, don't have a cure. So now, if I'm being told that, how do I want to show up in the world, right? Versus people labeling me disabled and patient and etc. What are the labels I want for myself? Fearfully and wonderfully made, and I have purpose, and I belong here, and I'm
Mhm.
not just a patient. So those are the things that I had to start reclaiming for myself, and not negotiating my self-worth just because now I'm living with this disease. That's kind of what I call making something with these lemonades, and making these lemons and making lemonade out of it. And that's what I hope when people hear this today, that they can find an affirmation for themselves in the process. So thank you, Dr. Strawn. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for these words of wisdom from Monique, from Chanel, from Dr. Strawn. I hope April is listening, and I think for all of our viewers, this idea that Dr. Strawn spoke to of suffering in silence, that's what we're fighting against. We want people to feel visible, and also to feel empowered to make their story visible. And I think that that's really what we're asking you to do when we're talking about a team, finding other people who see you. So we have some other great people who can talk to that. They all are involved in a lot of great work where we talk about team building. And, specifically to April, I think that, her having the courage to share all of her story and really encourage this conversation is, really the basis of why we're here tonight. So thank you, April. So I think that we're bringing in our next group of guests. And Chanel, do you want to introduce some of them?
Sure, definitely. So with that, we have quite a few fellow Lupies who are also doing amazing things and trying to bring support to others. We have three, and I really agree with you, Dr. Michaela. It's a team, it's a collective, and finding the right support group, knowing what you need from a support group is a major component of managing our lupus. So we know support groups can offer resources, peer sharing, help you know that you're not alone or that you're not making all of this up in your head, which sometimes we can feel like when we are isolated. So now we have quite a few lupus advocates from the Lupus Foundation. We have Wendy Rogers. She is the Director and Care Support Services. Wendy created the support group model for many underserved lupus communities. And we also have Sarita Pollinier. She's a psychologist who uses her life as a lupus warrior to better serve our community. And then last but not least, we have, they're a team, so they're coming in as a team. Stephanie Scoggins is us advocate and serves with Wendy as a support group co-facilitator. And we have April coming along with us to join in this conversation. So I'm welcoming everyone, the whole squad, the whole team to the stage. You got to be full house in here. How's everybody doing? So, welcome. Please, I think it's really important to note, Wendy and Stephanie in particular, how you two first met each other. You met at a support group, correct?
Yes, that's correct. In fact, so many things that have been said, I definitely deeply resonated with. Like Monique mentioned, my rock bottom, I actually had to give my family my funeral arrangements as well. So this is a tough disease, and I had been in the hospital for 6 months fighting for my life. I left in a wheelchair and had so many different challenges to face and try to bounce back from. And I was given a recommendation for a local support group, which I attended and rolled in the wheelchair. And that's where I met Stephanie, and we've been friends over 15 years now and have worked diligently to bring amazing support to the community.
And definitely, we have April back here. And I know, April, a lot of this story, this whole show kind of centered around like you sharing your stories with each of us individually. And April, just wanting to know, like, what are the struggles that you're dealing with right now? And what are the ways and people that might be supportive to you, or the things that you think you need from the support around you? April.
God, it's so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's still a
Can you
little
hear me?
staticky, but we're gonna make it through a little bit. We're
Okay.
so happy to have you.
Right now I'm dealing with, thank you. Right now I have a shunt. And I have pressure in my hip from the lupus. And I didn't have like probably about 10 surgeries so far. And this shunt the last shunt that I had put in left a little open space where I have fluid dripping. And I had that done at UCSF. And the doctor that did my surgery, he's no longer at UCSF anymore. He's in Arizona. So I decided to take to Stanford Hospital to see would they be able to help me. Make a long story short, I need major surgery.
So April, I'm sorry because we can't hear you well on your mic. I'm going to share some of what you were able to share with me earlier.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what we talked about, is that, as Dr. Strong brought up, and Chanel and I are always discussing, that lupus has very different faces for every person, and the symptoms are very individualized. And I think the women in this space can attest to this more than me because they're experiencing it themselves. But for April, her symptoms outside of the fatigue she was expressing to us today She's had joint pain and rash, and more recently, neurological symptoms, which can be a part of lupus for some people. And so, what she's been discussing and navigating is finding the right neurology professionals to help her. And that's been really difficult because she's been in an unfortunate situation, which probably happens to a lot of people, where they find a caregiver, they get care, they start a treatment, and then that person relocates or is no longer practicing. And so, how do you use the team you have to find new providers in the midst of having active symptoms like she's telling us, headache, feeling dizzy, not feeling like herself, tired? What can you guys say about that?
Well, I can go. It is really, really important to build a team. And with lupus, you have all the ologists. I'm so glad Dr. Strawn is here because I think people underestimate the need for psychological care. It was kind of sneaked into my care. And as a Black person, I know it could be very taboo when you seek that out. And so I was very fortunate with my medical team that we did that. At the Lupus Foundation of America, we have an amazing team of health education experts, which can work with people one-on-one to help them find individual care, especially as they're looking through local medical providers to try to find someone to match you. You can go to Ask a Health Educator. We even have an MD on our team to help with that. We don't give medical advice, but we do try to give people options, especially when they're overloaded. One thing I want to point out too, when you're dealing with lupus, sometimes things kind of get highlighted at different points in times of your life. And that's when you really want to try to focus on that particular medical provider. Looking for who might be in the network. Sometimes hospitals have people that they can help when you need to change doctors or look for doctors and referrals. And a lot of times because I have a family friendly type of relationship with my doctors, I often ask their advice to referring me to someone that they know as well. So those are some things just right away off the top of my head that I can share.
That was really good information, Wendy. I'm Stephanie, and I am a 33-year lupus survivor. As Wendy said, we met in a support group. I was at the point of death. Wendy was in a wheelchair at the point of death. Lupus, if you look at all of us, we're very beautiful, intelligent African American women. Lupus is the look good, feel bad disease. And it's something how it looks like we look fine. You would never think there was anything wrong with us, but inside we're a mess. All of our systems have been affected, from our brain to our liver, our kidneys, our skin, and all of that. And so there are a lot of times when a person will look at us and say, well, are you just being lazy? No, we're tired, we're fatigued. But because there's no physical bruise, like Dr. Strawn was saying, or there's nothing physical that you can see, I'm not believed. And it took me over 3 years to be diagnosed. I was first realized something was wrong in my second pregnancy. As I was giving birth, I had a grand mal seizure, and that was the first indication that something was wrong. And then after that, I never felt the same. Even though the doctors were looking, they were saying, okay, well, it's all in your head. We don't see anything. You don't have a definitive issue that's wrong. I first was diagnosed with a connective tissue disease because I didn't have all the markers for lupus. And so it took a while for it to manifest and to actually get a diagnosis. I was so worried. But then once you get the diagnosis of lupus and then find out that there is no cure for this disease, and you're going to have to take medicine the rest of your life, and you may not live. Once I was diagnosed, I was given only 5 months to live. I was married to a professional athlete. I was a corporate executive for a major car company making six figures. And I was also a mom, and I had 3 children under 10 years old. And to get a diagnosis that you're going to be gone in 5 months, that was atrocious. So from the psychological aspect of everything, physically, mentally, psychologically, and it took me a while to find the right fit of a physician. But once I found him, it was the greatest thing that happened for me.
And thank you
And
so much for sharing. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. We're running out of time. And I want to, like you said, something really important that I think would Sarita would be definitely be able to contribute to. And your role and thinking about support groups. What role does a support group play in tandem with a therapist or a counselor? How can that be helpful?
Sure, absolutely. So, one of the things that when you come in contact with a mental health professional, which unfortunately to talk on or to touch on something that Dr. Shauna Monique said, when African Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, just people of color, their first encounter with a mental health specialist is usually in the ER. And that's really
Mhm.
sad and unfortunate, something that needs to change. And like many of you said, there's stigmas, there are cultural reasons, the media, lots of different reasons why this is something that is plaguing specifically, especially the African American and Black communities. But when you're speaking with a therapist and you are letting them know that you have been diagnosed with something like an autoimmune disorder, chronic illness, things like that, the first things that they will tell you is to look or seek out other people who are also in support groups because they can tell you things that they're going through. They're usually going to talk about some of the struggles that they have. So I would definitely recommend going to a support group because there is that connection that you're building with people that you most likely aren't going to build with your therapist or with your psychiatrist. And speaking from someone who does mental health herself, if someone comes to me and they're telling me that they're experiencing a type of disease that I've never experienced, or I've never gone through MS or something like that. I can't relate to that, but I can direct that person to a support group where they're openly discussing these things and talking about these things. And that way that person doesn't feel stigmatized, they don't feel isolated, which leads to depression, which leads to all these other things that we were talking about. So support groups are extremely essential and they're key, they're pivotal to people who are suffering with chronic illnesses such as lupus.
So thank you. Thank you for sharing about the important role of support groups. I think for any of our viewers tonight, you have some great resources and people to connect to think about getting support and building your community and your team. Um, we want you all to continue looking for us and working with us. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Better Together Lupus, myself at the Lupus Doc, all the warriors who tuned in tonight. Thank you. We don't have a lot of time for comments tonight, but please keep posting your comments, connecting, continuing to share. It is so valuable for all of us, and especially the show as we bring you more content. So with that being said, Chanel and I want to thank Biogen. And we want to remind you that if you are interested in additional information on lupus and clinical trials, please check out the link. You will see it below, biogentriallink.com. And again, we look forward to seeing you in the future. So as always, we will end the evening with a spoken word piece from our resident artist and my co-host, Chanel. But I want to ask you to just tell us a little bit about the title and to tell me a little bit about your inspiration.
Oh, the title of this poem is called Testimony. And that's literally what this poem's about. Every breath, every step, every blink and heartbeat, you are miracle. This flesh, this temporary material with an eternal soul stole another week, another day, another hour. You are worthy of applause. Because, in the words of Audre Lorde, with all the things that tried to kill you and failed, it is your resilience that refused to be destroyed. And this is a celebration of the departing of pleurisy cough, of the lupus you fought, the trauma that you thought you could never have released you to joy. And if you survive the things that could have easily choked the pathways to your heart, why would you ever stop? Move forward. You are here to show others that they too can break boundaries and the binds of generations. You are proof that the trajectory can be transformed dramatically. This is another day to challenge the things that are seen and to command the things that aren't. Are you ready? Each morning, a beginning, a page with a story ready to be inscribed. I believe in you. No turning back. After every dark night, you are the sun that will rise. Thank you, Biogen, and we will see you next week. And make sure you look for all of the support group resources that are listed there.
Thank you, Chanel. Join us for our next webinar, The Journey for Solutions. Just to give you a round of applause. We're going to be talking about treatments that may work for you, but we love the energy that you close with every week. Thank you. And again, check out biogentriallink.com.